Welcome back to CNN's breaking news coverage of President Trump's address. We just heard it to senior U.S. military officers at the Marine base at Quantico, Virginia.
Let's go live now to CNN senior reporter Daniel Dale for a fact check. All right, Daniel, what stood out to you?
There were just so many false claims, and I say that after essentially every speech, unfortunately, from President Donald Trump. But I think this is notable because of the audience. He was telling a lot of lies, saying a lot of other inaccurate things, regardless of his intentions, to the U.S.'s top military leaders. So I want you to listen to something he said about former President Joe Biden and Biden's comments about the U.S. military.
I go around bragging about that. I said, we have the strongest military anywhere in the world. I say it. You never heard Biden say that. Never heard him say anything. But you never heard him say, did you ever hear him say, we have the strongest military? He doesn't say that. I say it.
The location matters more than the content. Politicians misstate facts. They exaggerate records. They characterize opponents uncharitably. These are not new phenomena, and they are not unique to any party or any president. The Washington Post fact-checker identified more than 30,000 false or misleading claims during Trump's first term. CNN's Daniel Dale has been doing this work so consistently that his acknowledgement, "I have to do this after essentially every speech," has the tone of professional exhaustion rather than surprise. But this speech was not at a rally, it was not at a press conference, it was not broadcast to supporters predisposed to accept every assertion without verification. This speech was delivered to the senior military leadership of the United States at the Marine Corps Base at Quantico, Virginia. Generals, admirals, the people who lead the most powerful military force in human history. The people who operate the chain of command that runs from the president to every service member deployed anywhere in the world. The people whose entire professional culture is built on a specific and non-negotiable institutional value, accurate information. In the military, inaccurate information kills people. False intelligence assessments produce failed operations. Misreported battlefield conditions produce tactical disasters. The chain of command functions only when every link in it can be trusted to pass accurate information up and accurate orders down. Officers are trained to give honest assessments even when those assessments are unwelcome. The phrase, "Sir, that assessment is incorrect," exists in the military vocabulary precisely because the system requires it. Trump stood in front of those officers and made claims that can be debunked with a 5-second Google search. Not complex policy disputes where reasonable people could disagree about interpretation, simple factual claims. Did Biden praise the U.S. military? Yes, repeatedly, on the record, in language stronger than what Trump typically uses. Did Biden propose eliminating Space Force? No, never. Not a quote, not a policy proposal, not an internal memo. Nothing. The military leaders in that room know this. They have access to the same information Daniel Dale used to produce his fact check in the time it takes to pour a cup of coffee. Some of them were almost certainly in the room for Biden's speeches. Some of them briefed both administrations. They know what both presidents said. They sat there and heard their commander-in-chief tell them things that were false, and they could not say a word.
President Biden said that over and over. This took me about 5 seconds to find on Google. One sample quote from 2023. Our U.S. military, and this is not hyperbole, I've said it for the last 2 years, is the strongest military in the history of the world, not just the strongest in the world, in the history of the world. So this is just one of many such quotes from President Biden. And he made another false claim about President Biden and the military, falsely claiming at another point in the speech today that President Biden had suggested early in this term that he could get rid of the Space Force established under President Trump. Listen to that quote.
Let's work through both claims with the precision they deserve, because understanding exactly what was said and exactly why it fails tells you something specific about the mechanism at work. Claim 1. Biden never said the U.S. has the strongest military. Trump's exact framing to the Quantico audience. You never heard Biden say that, never heard him say anything, specifically asking the assembled military leadership whether they ever heard Biden say, "We have the strongest military," with the clear implication that the answer is no. The answer is demonstrably yes. In 2023, Biden said on the record, "Our U.S. military," and this is not hyperbole, I've said it for the last 2 years, is the strongest military in the history of the world. Not the strongest currently, in the history of the world. Biden's actual statement goes further than the claim Trump was asserting as uniquely his own. Daniel Dale found this quote in approximately 5 seconds. It is in the public record. It has been in the public record since 2023. The people in that room at Quantico, senior military officers who brief presidents and track what both administrations say about defense, have access to the same record. Some of them are almost certainly aware of the quote. Claim 2. Biden proposed eliminating Space Force. Trump characterized Biden as having suggested early in his term that he could eliminate Space Force, the branch Trump established during his first presidency. The narrative purpose is clear. Trump created it. Biden wanted to destroy it. Only Trump truly values this institution. Biden never proposed eliminating Space Force. Not in a speech, not in a policy document, not in a budget proposal, not in an internal communication that has since been made public. The branch was funded and grew during Biden's presidency. There is no source for Trump's claim because the claim is not grounded in any documented event. The pattern both claims reveal. Neither of these is a complex policy disagreement where the facts are genuinely contested. Neither requires deep research or legal analysis to evaluate. Both are simple factual claims. Did someone say something? Did someone propose something? That resolve immediately upon checking the primary sources that any person with internet access can find in seconds. Trump made both claims to an audience that almost certainly knows they are false. There are 3 possible explanations for why a president would make easily disprovable false claims to an audience capable of immediately recognizing them as false. First, genuine ignorance. Trump doesn't follow Biden's speeches carefully and doesn't know Biden made these statements. This would be willful inattention rather than deliberate deception, but it produces the same result: false information delivered to military leadership. Second, calculated deception. Trump knows the claims are false, but calculates that his audience won't contradict him in the moment, that no general will stand up in the room and say, "Mr. President, Biden actually said that," and that the asymmetry of the moment, commander-in-chief at a podium, military leadership sitting in audience, protects the claims from immediate challenge. Third, indifference to accuracy. Trump makes statements that serve his narrative and doesn't track or care whether they are factually true. If the claim builds the contrast he wants, Trump supports the military, Biden doesn't. The claim gets made regardless of whether it survives contact with the historical record. Any of these 3 explanations is a specific kind of problem when the person being described is the commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces. The military's chain of command depends on accurate information at every link. A commander who is genuinely ignorant of easily available facts, or who is comfortable making false claims to audiences that cannot challenge them, or who is indifferent to whether what he says is true, that commander creates specific institutional risks that extend well beyond the political consequences of bad optics. They know some of what Trump said is false. They have access to the information. They are professionally trained to assess claims against evidence. They are institutionally expected to provide honest assessments to superiors, even when those assessments are unwelcome, and they cannot say anything. Military officers cannot publicly contradict the commander-in-chief. That is not a norm. It is a constitutional and institutional reality. Civilian control of the military requires that military officers do not publicly challenge, contradict, or undermine the political leadership. An admiral who stood up at Quantico and said, "Mr. President, Biden actually made that statement, here is the quote," would be committing an act of insubordination that would almost certainly end his career. The structure of civil-military relations does not permit that response, regardless of how clearly the record contradicts what was just said. So the military officers in that room had 2 options. They could sit in silence and appear to accept the false claims. performing agreement with assertions they know to be untrue as a function of the institutional constraints that govern their relationship to civilian authority. Or they could sit in silence while privately noting the discrepancy, carrying the awareness that their commander-in-chief just told them demonstrably false things in a formal military setting, and processing what that means for the reliability of information that flows from the top of the chain of command. Neither option is good for the institution. The first corrodes the professional integrity that military culture exists to protect. The second creates a private epistemic gap between what the commander says and what the officers know to be true. A gap that, if it compounds across enough interactions, undermines the trust that the chain of command requires to function. The problem is not that this speech happened in isolation. Daniel Dale's acknowledgement that he has to fact-check essentially every Trump speech is the diagnostic statement that places this speech in its correct context. This is not an aberration. This is a pattern. And a pattern of dishonesty from the commander-in-chief is not a political problem in the ordinary sense. It is an institutional problem for the military itself. The military operates on accurate intelligence. Commanders make decisions based on factual briefings. Staff officers are expected to give honest assessments, even when those assessments are inconvenient for their superiors. The entire institutional culture of the armed forces, the thing that distinguishes military professionalism from mere compliance, is built on the premise that accurate information is a non-negotiable requirement, not an optional feature. When the person at the top of the chain does not share that premise, the institutional culture faces specific pressure it was not designed to absorb from that direction. The broader institutional consequence of systematic dishonesty in political leadership is worth analyzing carefully because it extends beyond the immediate political damage of any single false claim. When a political leader makes false statements with sufficient frequency that professional fact-checkers describe it as routine, when "I have to do this after essentially every speech" is the honest professional assessment, the information environment around that leader begins to degrade in specific and documented ways. First, the credibility cost. Every false claim that gets publicly fact-checked reduces the reliability weight that accurate statements carry. If a source is known to make false claims with high frequency, even its true claims require independent verification before they can be acted upon. For a president, this means that statements about military readiness, intelligence assessments, diplomatic commitments, and policy directions must all be independently verified rather than simply accepted as accurate. That verification requirement imposes costs in time, in resources, in the attention of people who would otherwise be doing other things. Second, the audience segmentation problem. The people most likely to see Trump's claims are also the people most likely to encounter Daniel Dale's fact checks, but the audiences for these two things do not fully overlap. Supporters who watch Trump speeches in full may not watch CNN's fact check segment. People who see the fact check may not have watched the original speech. The result is an information environment in which different groups have different working models of basic facts. A situation that makes coordinated action, shared understanding, and productive disagreement all harder to achieve. Third, the normalization effect. When false claims are made without significant consequences, they establish what behavior is permissible. Other political actors observe that dishonesty is available as a tool without prohibitive cost. The culture of political communication shifts toward one where accuracy is one option among several rather than a baseline requirement. Daniel Dale's weariness is the human expression of this normalization. He has been doing this work for years. He has documented thousands of false and misleading claims, and his institutional response, continuing to fact-check with professional rigor, is correct and necessary. But the fact that professional fact-checking has become a routine feature of covering any Trump speech describes a state of affairs that represents a significant degradation from the baseline expectations of political communication. For military institutions specifically, this degradation is not abstract. Senior military officers operate in an environment where the accuracy of information from the civilian leadership affects real operational decisions. When that information environment is known to be unreliable, When the chain of command's top link is documented to produce false claims at high frequency, the institutional response requires additional verification steps, reduced reliance on political level information, and greater dependence on independent intelligence assessments. That is not a catastrophic institutional failure. The military has mechanisms for managing this kind of signal-to-noise problem. But it is a real institutional cost imposed by the pattern of behavior that Daniel Dale's fact check is documenting in real time. The specific content of Trump's false claims at Quantico reveals something precise about his approach to military audiences, and it is worth naming directly. Both false claims serve the same narrative purpose. They establish Trump as the president who uniquely values and supports the military, contrasted with a predecessor who did not. Trump is the one who says, "We have the strongest military." Trump is the one who created Space Force. Biden neither praised military strength nor valued the branch Trump built. This is a political narrative, one that serves Trump's positioning as the military's genuine champion, and it requires specific claims about Biden's record to work. The problem is that Biden's actual record does not support the narrative. Biden repeatedly praised the military. Biden supported and funded Space Force. The narrative requires a version of Biden that does not match the documented Biden, and Trump is willing to provide that version to the audience in front of him regardless of whether the audience knows the documented version. This is the political logic. Trump views military leadership as an audience to be persuaded rather than as an institution to be accurately briefed. The same approach he uses at rallies, make claims that build the narrative, don't track whether they survive fact-checking, is being applied in a setting where it is institutionally inappropriate and where the audience almost certainly knows better. There is a specific irony in this. Trump's political identity is built substantially around the claim that he uniquely respects and supports the military. That unlike his predecessors, he understands and values what military service means. Yet the speech at Quantico reveals that his respect for military leadership does not extend to giving them accurate information. He treats them as he treats any other political audience, people to be persuaded with claims that serve the narrative, regardless of whether those claims are true. The military officers in that room are among the most rigorously trained evaluators of information in any institution in the country. They are trained to assess sources for reliability, to cross-check intelligence, to identify when they are being given information that does not match the operational reality they can independently verify. They applied those skills, passively, silently, in real time, to what Trump was telling them. And at least some of them concluded, as Daniel Dale concluded in 5 seconds, that what they were hearing was not accurate. Point 1. Both specific claims Trump made at Quantico are demonstrably false, not contested, not ambiguous, not dependent on interpretation. False. Verifiable in seconds from the primary sources.